Here today at our 7th annual Western Women's Summit, the Clare Boothe Luce Policy Institute is presenting an award that we don't give every year because women of exceptional courage are so very rare. We look very carefully, and when we find one of these women who has shown extraordinary courage, dedication, and grace in defending freedom, we select her for this award. This year, we are so pleased to present the 2014 Woman of Exceptional Courage Award to the founder and president of True the Vote, Catherine Engelbrecht. Catherine is a mother, a business owner, and a proud native Texan. According to her congressional testimony, the life she leads today is in stark contrast to what she did before 2010, when she was raising her children and participating in her church and PTA. Shortly after filing IRS forms to establish 501c3 and 501c4 tax-exempt organizations, an assortment of federal agencies, including the FBI, and other law enforcement agencies, and a congressman from Maryland came knocking at her door. After she founded True the Vote, an organization which seeks to prevent voter fraud, she became the target of several hostile government agencies. True the Vote educates voters, researches the veracity of voter registrations, trains and mobilizes volunteers to work in polling places, and advocates for comprehensive election code reform legislation. In just a few short years, True the Vote has become the nation's leading voters' rights organization. Under Catherine's leadership, True the Vote has launched a precedent-setting lawsuit against the IRS and top leadership. For her efforts to bring integrity back into our voting system, Catherine, her family, and her business were subject to no less than 15 instances of audits and investigation by government agencies, including the IRS and the FBI. What did she do to merit being a target? She believed that government was not being held accountable, that it abuses the rights of American citizens, and that voter integrity was and is a serious issue facing our country. The IRS asked hundreds of intrusive questions, including requesting every Facebook post and tweet that she had ever written. She received questions about her family, whether she'd ever run for political office, and which organizations she had spoken to, among other questions. Through it all, Catherine has come out stronger than ever and has made a powerful impact. She has spoken to hundreds of grassroots activists and has testified before Congress about her treatment at the hands of the IRS and other agencies. Her testimony shed tremendous light on the growing scandal surrounding the IRS targeting of conservative groups. In 2011, the Conservative Political Action Conference presented Catherine and True the Vote with the Ronald Reagan Freedom Award in recognition of her groundbreaking work. In 2012, she was named one of Politico's 50 to Watch, which is given to 50 new and rising talents on the national political scene. Catherine is also featured in the new 2015 Great American Conservative Women Calendar for the month of March. Catherine, please know that by standing so firmly, you inspire all of us to be more courageous and determined, and not to back down when we know we are right, even when it's easier to just withdraw. Many in the media, unions, and especially on college campuses do all they can to silence women with a passion for conservatism and freedom like Catherine. Most colleges and women's studies courses are studying leftist role models like Hillary Clinton and Nancy Pelosi, not Catherine Engelbrecht. But at the Clare Boothe Luce Institute, we are eager to honor leaders like Catherine. And we want to recognize Catherine today, a leader who, like Clare Boothe Luce, is the ultimate professional, persuasive, principled, and beautiful. Now I would like to give you this special award, the Clare Boothe Luce Policy Institute's Woman of Exceptional Courage, with our grateful thanks for standing up and defending all that makes our nation unique and special. Please join me in welcoming a woman of exceptional courage, Catherine Engelbrecht.
Thank you. Thanks. Thank you. Oh, thank y'all. That's awesome. Thank you. Thank you very much. Thank you. Just set that right here. We can all look at that the whole time I talk. How about that? Thanks so much for the invitation. I've never been to Santa Barbara before. It's beautiful. I'm looking forward. I'm going to go on the tour tomorrow. I'm looking forward to that. But I tell you what brings me here is still a little surreal, and hearing Catherine give that introduction, which was lovely, by the way. Thank you very much. To hear it recounted, sort of what the journey that's brought me here, I can assure you that in 2008, I would have, if you would have said, now fast forward, Catherine, because in 5 years, when you're the age of many of you in the room, you're often asked the question, where do you see yourself in 5 years? I would have never said, oh, well, I'll be at the podium of the Clare Boothe Luce group talking with them about how we've been the target of audits and investigations at the hands of our own federal government, but it's true. And I would like to take a few minutes to sort of tell you the story, why we started, what we believe we're accomplishing, some of the challenges that I faced. But the message I want to make sure to leave you with, so I will begin with it, is never underestimate the power of the single individual. If you just stand and stand in the face of whatever befalls you, whatever may present itself in such a way that you don't know quite whether or not, it's like I pray over my children every night, make the wise choice, not just the easy choice. Now is a time for wise choices. You must stand up, because if not you, who? We are, I mean, it's only appropriate to quote Ronald Reagan, we are that last shining city on a hill. There is no more. There are no more. So, okay, how did I get here? Well, in 2009, I had watched the political landscape become something that I really couldn't connect to, and I suspect that most of you in here are political creatures. You've watched politics. You know it. You know that this is already something you're passionate about. I can tell you that when I was your age, I had no idea that groups like this existed. I was absolutely unplugged from this part of our culture. I had no idea that beyond just going to vote, there was any really way for a citizen to stay engaged. So in an effort to find my way back in 2009, because at the time, as Catherine said in my introduction, I was running a company, I was involved in my kids' school, we were helping found a church, and at every level, the government had its fingers in there. There were regulations, there were taxes, there were reams of paperwork that had to be filled out. You couldn't move freely anymore. And so I looked for a way to get involved. And I learned that there was a need for people to work at the polls. And a brief timeout. There is still a tremendous need for people to work at the polls. And certainly in light of what we see our Department of Justice doing now, where it is fighting against states that want to see photo voter identification in their own polling places, the only thing that will stand in that gap is a citizen who is willing to be the eyes and ears of the Republic. So elections are now, and I hope forevermore, about more than just going to vote on Election Day. It is no longer enough to feel good about yourself because you got the I voted sticker. we've now got to engage in that process. Vote early and then go work on Election Day. That is critical. There should be no polling place left unmanned. There should be no voter registry left unchecked. And that was sort of what I didn't know was the fullness of the truth in 2009. I just knew that there was a need for volunteers, and I really thought it was going to be a one-day gig. I thought that I'd go work at the polls, check that off my good citizen list, and move on. But what I saw as a business person, just on a practical level, as a business person, I couldn't abide because the process was just too chaotic. Quick show of hands in here. How many of you have worked inside the polls? Oh, my brothers and sisters, all right. Then you know it can be a very unsettling experience because you are called to a very high standard, and you do this maybe once a year, maybe only once, once in your lifetime. But when you are in that room, making sure that every vote counts and is counted, there are a lot of things that are, a lot of moving parts, a lot of moving pieces. So I saw it just procedurally as being a problem, but more than that, I was part of a very small group that saw election fraud. We saw people who came in with registration cards in their possession in different names, and when they would present the first one and be told, "Oh, I'm sorry, sir, you've already voted," they would pull out the other one. "How about this one?" "Oh, that's fine, yeah, that's good." We saw people who would come in and be prepared. In Texas, you have to sign a poll book, and God bless the 10th Amendment, everybody handles their elections a little differently, but in Texas, you have to sign a poll book in most places. We saw people who would come in, get ready to sign the poll book, and there's already a name signed by their name that wasn't in their handwriting, and they had no recollection of having already voted, but there was nothing that could be done. I mean, their vote had been stolen, and there was no recourse. But what we saw more often, and still to this day see, and some of you that have worked in the polls may have seen this yourself, people who come in and just sort of seem like maybe they've just stumbled their way into the polls with no real idea of who they're going to vote for or what they're really oftentimes expected to do. So they say, "I don't know who to vote for." Now, this is what we heard in 2009. "I don't know who I'm supposed to vote for." And then an election judge would say, "Oh, I can help you with that." And they would go to the voting booth, and you would hear the election judge tell the voter how to vote. Now, in 2009, we didn't know. I mean, we were just slack-jawed, like, I think that's illegal. I think you shouldn't be doing those things. But we had no idea, because it happens in the blink of an eye. And it's commonly said, well, there's no such thing as vote fraud. Well, it happens. There's nothing to prevent it in most of our states. We don't have photo voter identification. There are very few safeguards to the process, and frankly, even when you do see it, there's very little political will to prosecute. It's not something that is high on many politicians' priority list, because once they get elected, they just want to move on down the road, like, I've done my bit, so I don't really want to deal with the details. So with that in mind, then, we recognized that something had to be done to the process because it was coming unstitched. That was the genesis of True the Vote. And our first foray into it all then was not just to work in the polls, but to take a real look at sort of deconstructing the whole thing, soup to nuts. Where can citizens get involved, and how can they be involved? Because of some of the problems we saw with registrations at the polls, we assumed that, well, maybe one of the first places we should look is at the actual registration process. There are groups that come in and claim that they're going to register hundreds of thousands of people in just a matter of a few months. Something doesn't add up with those kinds of claims. Maybe they're just ginning through registrations, and maybe if we took a closer look, we'd find something. So we started a research project, found some stuff, went public with it, and I'll tell you what, in the interest of time, let me just tell you that it was like a political dog whistle had been blown. And all of a sudden, there was this new group that was looking at the voter rolls, that questioned why in 2008, when Acorn turned in 1.3, 1.4 some odd million registrations, and in the end, only 400,000 some odd of them turned out to be good. There's now a group that's questioning what happened to that differential, and why were they registered to begin with. that didn't sit well with those who have an awful lot to benefit by being able to manipulate the process. As we grew, and now we have volunteers in all 50 states, we have programs in place that help citizens find their way into the electoral process, from training to research to helping advocate for common sense election code reform. When we started out, and you know, it's being here, I had the great privilege of speaking to your group once before in D.C., and one of the things that I was gifted with as a result of my presentation was a coffee cup that has a Clare Boothe Luce quote on it. And I'm a big, I got something that kind of sounded maybe funny. I'm a huge coffee mug fan, so it's like a big deal. Like, which one am I going to choose in the morning? You know, it's going to dictate the rest of my day is the choice of the coffee mug. And the quote, you know, that is on this mug from oh my God, from Clare Boothe Luce, wow, is "No good deed goes unpunished." Well, there you have it. I'm living proof. No good deed goes unpunished. So in any case, we started this effort and filed for nonprofit status, and out of nowhere, all of a sudden the IRS became very interested, not just in the nonprofit piece of True the Vote, but in my personal life, in my business life. We had visits from the FBI, we had visits from OSHA, we had visits from the Bureau of Alcohol, Tobacco, and Firearms. All of a sudden, very curious about all aspects of my personal life, where prior to filing that nonprofit paperwork, prior to getting involved with True the Vote, nobody really ever, I mean, I say really, nobody ever, no government agency ever came to us and asked questions about what we were doing or how we were doing it. But after we filed that nonprofit application, things changed. We are in perilous times in this country. And we stand now, I believe, in this upcoming election at a real crossroads. We're going to have a choice, not only about what becomes of those in power in Washington, but we're going to have a choice at the polls because of this trumped-up rhetoric that is going to continue, I believe, to incite people in ways that are just disingenuous. This idea that photo voter identification is an effort to suppress the vote, and then that messaging kind of spins out of control to the professional agitators on Pennsylvania Avenue. If we don't stand up and just say citizens should be engaged in elections, we value the process, we value the process enough to take our time to be present in it, we are going to see an ever more rapid slide towards a place where our government controls elections in total. We already have sister states that have all mail-in ballots, where they've completely decommissioned the process of seeing people face to face. We are moving towards a place where in certain states, in Maryland, for example, there are already initiatives pushing forward for what's called universal voter registration, where you have, if you exist on a government roll anywhere, you're automatically registered to vote. And look, voting is absolutely a civil right, but it should be a choice. And with that right comes responsibility. These are the kinds of things that are going to continue to surround our process if we as citizens don't say, enough is enough. There's common sense to be considered here. There's a very real possibility that in the not too distant future, you will find yourself in a place where you vote online and the low information voter rules the day. Because all they have to do is hit an enter button, their ballots are automatically filled out, and they're done. And it's just sort of a mock process where we count the votes of chattel at the end of the day. Don't let that happen. Make a stand now while we can. Our future, quite literally, is dependent upon it. And this is not a game, it is not a drill, and when you read the news or find yourself watching in shock and appall at what's happening around the world as a result of our country's sort of lackadaisical attitude to its role. It is exactly as it seems to be. We are losing our country. It's not too late. We can engage now, but it's going to require that all of us take a stand. All of us take a stand, and we not only stand up, but we talk to others, and we talk to others boldly. One of the things I've learned in this process, and then I'll turn it over for questions, but one of the things I've learned in this process along the way was that the best thing you can do when you are under scrutiny is tell others what's going on. Let others in on the one thing that oftentimes your opponents can use against you, which is fear. And for the first couple of years of all of these audits and all of these investigations, I was frightened. And I didn't tell anybody. I thought, my God, the stigma of going through all the audits, I just didn't want people to know. And that was used then to keep me quiet. The way that this agenda advances is if we keep quiet. There is strength in numbers. Observation and truth-telling changes things. Please get involved. If our elections are not truly fair, we are not truly free. True the Vote will continue to stand in the gap and in the trenches, working hard to make sure that we are empowering citizens to have the tools they need to know how to plug in, but it takes a commitment now from all of us to be willing to show up and do the hard work that it's going to take. We can absolutely find our way back. We just have to be willing to look for it a little bit. So with that, I thank you so much for the great privilege of visiting with you, and I'm glad to take any questions that you may have. Thanks.
Hi. First of all, thank you so much for coming and speaking to us today. This is so wonderful. I'm Catherine. I'm a senior at Swanee in Tennessee. And I guess my question is, talking about being at the polls and overseeing identification and stuff, with states that are now giving out driver's licenses and identification to illegal immigrants, how do you see, it's a very loaded question, but
Right.
I guess in your mind, kind of what's a solution to that or the impact, not necessarily in November, but especially with the next presidential election, because, with the false identification being legalized?
Yeah, it's tough. There's so, we are, one of the things I think that is of greatest concern, or should be of greatest concern in this direction that we're headed, is this willingness to sort of bend over backwards for political correctness, that we can't speak the truth. We're like the Cirque du Soleil of liberty. We'll try to do anything to contort so that we make sure that we aren't offending anybody. And guess what? The very people that we try not to offend are the ones that get offended in this process. When you have states like this that are issuing identification forms that aren't being checked, there's only one thing that stands in that gap, and it's the citizens. There are ways through research that you can take a leadership role in pointing out these things, and then it's going to take a big voice in your state legislature to have things overturned, to let it be known, to bring it to the public attention that the process is being subverted in this way. But I'll tell you, there are no easy answers. There are no easy answers because our culture has bought into this agenda that there's probably no such thing as voter fraud. There have been prosecutions or convictions of vote fraud-related crimes in 35 states in the last 18 months. There are very, very serious implications with election fraud. We are one of the last, if not the only, industrialized country in the world that does not currently have photo voter identification. We also have the lowest voter turnout of any industrialized country in the world. And all of that is because we're willing to see preposterous procedures put into place because we dare not offend. And we need to take another hard look at what the definition of offense really is.
Hi, Andrea Carlson, University of Illinois Springfield. I was just reading actually yesterday that one of the federal judges in Texas struck down the voter ID law, and obviously that's going to be appealed. Is True the Vote doing anything to help with those appeal efforts, or doing anything to help enforce the voter ID as this goes on?
Oh, well, we tried in the Texas voter ID case, we tried to intervene, and then there's not enough time to explain to you what that process is really like. But the long and the short of it was that we were not able to stay in the case and intervene. And that was a real heartbreak, because we have a platform that really nobody else has. We have the ability to bring forward evidence that really nobody else does. What has happened now is that there's going to be a stay put on photo voter identification. There's still a little bit of question about whether or not it's going to advance in November, but the likelihood is Texas won't have photo voter identification in November, and this is going to be fought out in the courts. We'll go to the Court of Appeals, then we'll go to the Supreme Court. But to hear a federal judge call the Texas photo voter identification legislation, which is free, which exempts seniors, which gives you 7 different options for photos, which the state has buses going all over making sure that if you can't get to a DMV, they'll provide that registration to you on the spot. Again, doing everything they can. Then to hear a federal judge characterize it as a poll tax? Come on! A poll tax? Really? You know what? A poll tax back in the day was horrible. That was horrible. We have moved forward from that. We are moving to a better place. But this is more about political agendizing and keeping alive this narrative that there's always the victim and the oppressor. And it's in that victimhood then that the agitation works. So we're going to stay engaged. We're going to stay engaged in all the states that have it in play. But it's a challenge.
Lauren McHugh from Virginia Tech. So recently in Virginia, they have it so students can present their student ID as a form of voter identification, which those are really easy to get on your hands, and you can really duplicate them really easily. So how do you suggest that we fight that, especially on the campus level?
Well, I believe that any source of identification should be something that can be traced back or checked back at a state level. That's really the only way to authenticate it. I mean, I can get a picture on any kind of card, and if it's not trackable back to a single source, it's really, about as good as the paper it's printed on, I guess. The way to stop it has to be through legislation, through advocating for a series of identification options that have a common element that allows you to provide security. And an unsecured student ID doesn't meet that bill.
Hi, Catherine. You may not remember, but you did come and speak at the Montecito Country Club in 2011.
I do remember that.
I don't know if it was Cheryl Cohen or Mary Bell Snow, but it was that was when locally we instituted for the 2012 election. We started all working right away and following the guidelines of True the Vote. And I do believe it's called something different in California.
The Election Integrity Project.
Right. And there is a fine line in this. You may observe, I don't want people here to think you can just show up at the booth and see something irregular and it will be validated as voter fraud, because that's the furthest thing from the truth.
That's exactly right.
You have to follow certain guidelines. And it is, I would recommend that everyone here in their community figure out, go to your website and find out who in their community is offering True the Vote. It may be under a different name, but I will share with you that many of us who contributed to True the Vote, I'm going to just assume your donor list was probably confiscated by the IRS, but all of us were audited as well, which is very sad.
Wow.
Yeah.
Well, I'm stunned. It's the first time I've heard that. Not all of us, but a lot. I mean, as a practical matter, as a C3 organization, donor names just aren't released. I mean, it's just not even part of the schema. So I'm not sure, but I don't even know. I'm sorry. Welcome to the club. No. I don't know, but but you're exactly right as it relates to what it really means to engage. You can't just show up. I mean, there actually are a couple states where you can just show up, but generally speaking, you've got to be assigned a place to go and work. You've got to have that assignment made with either a political party or a candidate, or sometimes directly with the county. When you are inside the polls, and in anything that you're going to get involved in with elections, there are standards that of course, True the Vote is first and foremost about recognizing that laws are important, and the rule of law has to be what we're guided by. I will tell you that we are about to launch a new phone app called Vote Stand. And it's going to be out in about, it's working its way through the Apple Store right now, but in about a week or two. And it's going to give you a way to, online, if you see something, to file an incident report that will go back and be able to be tracked back into a master database. Things happen so quickly that it's oftentimes hard if you're not right there and on it. Even though when you do see things, you will find that it becomes a wild goose chase of, okay, I turned this in to the Secretary of State. Now they had to turn it over to the Attorney General. So was anybody followed up with? Did anybody really take any action to advance that complaint? More often than not, the answer is no, for a number of reasons. I mean, in general, vote fraud or election fraud related issues carry with them a misdemeanor. So if I'm the Attorney General and my desk is stacked with, capital murder cases or vote fraud cases, generally you're going to find that they will be more willing to devote resources and manpower to those cases that they would deem more extreme. And what happens then is that the vote fraud pieces oftentimes just get left in the dust, which is why you have to stay on it with open records requests. It's a cycle that you have to continue to push forward on, and you really have to have a passion for it, because we are, it's the term making a market. We're making a market. We're making a market for integrity in a culture that has forgotten what integrity really means.
Are you doing a video on this or anything?
Yes,
I
absolutely.
think we have time for one more question.
The two federal appeals courts that ruled against voter ID yesterday said it was an undue burden because so few cases of voter fraud have been proven at the polls. When I lived in Kentucky, there was voter fraud because people would actually pay for their vote by mail. So it was proven. How many cases have there actually been proven at the polls? We work at the polls, and we're very careful about that.
Oh, sure. Even as close as I am to the subject matter, it's an impossible answer, because there are no sort of centralized collection points where you really have to start to look in newspapers. You kind of hear things through the grapevine. There's somehow our culture has found itself at a place where, when it doesn't serve a political agenda to report things aren't reported. Things aren't given any level of importance. I would suggest that that's what we find is the case with election integrity issues. It's best left not discussed, because the narrative that rules the day is that photo voter identification is unfair, and we must at all costs stop any advancement to try to make sure that a voter can prove they are who they say they are when they get to the polls. That said, there are, you can go to the True the Vote website and see how many things that we've found. But how many things, given the scenarios that I've laid out for you today, how many things are seen and people just give up and say, forget it. I'm not going to pursue it. I'm not going to push it. It happened. Everybody's going to call me, everybody's going to call me a racist, or I'm going to get sued. I'm going to forget it. But that's not the case if we all stand up together and say, enough is enough. let the best man or woman win, just let it be a fair process, and every eligible voter, regardless of political party affiliation, deserves an opportunity to participate in a free and fair election. But we have forgotten that it's the citizens' responsibility to hold that true. Without the citizen engagement, we are headed towards a place that we're not going to recognize.